Chronologically, this episode should be the first one in series History of Architecture in Sketches. But it's the second one. For those of you who missed it, the first episode was about Greek and Roman classical orders. Architecture of ancient Egypt is primarily associated with pyramids, so I'll start with them. Even though they are majestic and mysterious, they can be hardly perceived as a fascinating drawing subject due to their geometric simplicity. In short, most of them consist of a square base and walls inclined at an angle of 50 degrees. What's even worse, stories about kilometers of labyrinth corridors meandering in depths of pyramids full of fancy traps seem to be slightly exaggerated. In the cross-section of the Pyramid of Cheops, we can see 3 little chambers, a few straight corridors with so-called Grand Gallery, and some air tunnels. Nevertheless, the widespread notion about sophisticated curses placed inside Egyptian tombs is true. A curse from a tomb of Amenhotep, son of Hapu, threatens uninvited guests with the whole mass of miseries. For example, losing all earthly positions and honors, being burned in a furnace, drowning at sea, or having no successors. Other type of buildings that survived through thousands of years in a remarkably good shape are temples. At the beginning, their structures were very simple: a square pillar and ceiling beams. Charming like contemporary concrete constructions, but these were obviously made of stone. Processing stone with simple tools was an extremely hard task. Nevertheless, by cutting corners, their cross-sections changed into octagons, and later hexadecagons, and finally round columns appeared. Those columns were stubby, thicker in the bottom part, and placed on a round base. Shapes of capitals were usually inspired by Egyptian plants, such as palms, papyrus, and lotus, but simplified and geometrized. This one resembles an open lotus. In a while you will see other variations. Above the capital there is a plain, quite flat cuboid supporting stone ceiling beams. On the ceiling beams there was a flat roof, also made of stone. Remember very defined and unified Greek columns? Well, Egyptian columns were much more unique. Shafts were divided into horizontal belts, often decorated with engraved hieroglyphs, plant ornaments, images of pharaohs and gods, or even whole scenes of religious and historical character. We might say that columns were telling stories in color, as they were painted with contrasting colors. This capital resembles closed lotus. This one is a papyrus capital. This capital resembles a bud of papyrus. And here is a palm capital. Sometimes capitals took shape of faces, like this famous motif of goddess Hathor facing 4 directions of the world. Shafts could be just round in a horizontal section or more complex, to resemble a bunch of stalks. Frieze was also a good spot for decorations, like a motif of blooming reeds. Just in the case you were wondering what that is. Cornices often resembled mat rolls. These are actually quite fun to draw and may be a good inspiration for fantasy buildings, even sci-fi buildings. Just add your imaginary scripture, depiction of gods or rulers, slightly change columns' capitals. In other words, make something similar but totally different. And you have good chances to create a very interesting design. People were portrayed in a very specific way, Almost whole figure was depicted in profile, besides a chest and an eye, which were shown in a frontal view. This way, ancient Egyptians could show the most characteristic features of a person to make him or her easily recognizable. This drawing is not a copy of some specific Egyptian column, so there is a risk that I wrote something extremely stupid with those hieroglyphs. I just randomly redraw symbols from this bookmark. Very scientific approach. This is one of the most characteristic ornaments placed in especially important spots, like above entrances. Winged sun with two sacred serpents. The symbol of winged sun appears in many ancient cultures. In the case of Egypt, it symbolizes royal power and divinity, but also a fight between good and evil. Now, once we've seen the details, let's see how a temple could look like. An excellent example is Temple of Amun-re in Karnak. Amun-re was worshipped as a god of fertility, wind, and a king of the gods. He was associated with a ram, which would explain sphinx wally in front of the temple, flanked with 4 giant lion-ram creatures with pharaoh's statues between their front paws. This wally was used as a ceremonial way for a barge with Amon's statue. After passing the sphinx wally, we could go through the gate with pylons. Stone blocks were carefully hewn, wider at the base and narrower at the top, which created very characteristic shapes of Egyptian buildings. Behind the gate there is a huge courtyard. So far could a mere mortal come. In front of the second pylon there was a giant statue of Ramses II and his wife, which in turn wasn't so giant. Apparently she reached her husband only to his knees. The next part of the temple, an impressive prayer hall, could be visited only by the few, probably dignitaries and priests. It housed 134 giant columns. But why? You see, these columns were supporting stone beams, which unfortunately weren't really bending resistant. The only solution to sustain the beams was to use lots of massive columns placed close to each other. The result was an impression of a dense forest of columns, which often looked like plants, so everything was perfectly logical. Some of them were about 3.5 meters in diameter and about 23 meters high. It's important to bear in mind that builders in ancient Egypt didn't know vaults or arches, only straight ceilings. Behind the hall there was a smaller courtyard leading to the holy place. Regardless its high rank, this sanctuary was relatively small. Only pharaohs and higher priests could come here because here secret rituals were taking place. I don't know how secret these rituals really were, because without any bigger problems I stumbled upon an information that in this room the statuette of Amun was anointed with oils and received offerings of food. Even though the temple itself was really impressive, it was only a part of a huge complex of temples in Karnak, which was gradually expanded for over 1200 years. In general, only temples and resting places of especially important people were built in such a solid way. Durability of cities wasn't such a big concern because of their low significance and overflows of the Nile. Mere mortals had to be content with mud huts or houses made of bricks from sun-dried Nile loam. Nevertheless, at that time it was a cutting-edge technology on a world scale. Cities were divided with regular rectangular building plots and straight roads, and surrounded by walls protecting citizens from sandstorms. Okay, here's architecture of ancient Egypt in a nutshell. I hope you liked it. The next subject will be super interesting, I hope. Thanks for watching.